Have you ever wanted to know how Olympic sailors set up their boats? These are sailors who have spent years perfecting and tweaking their boat setup. Today, we're diving into the rigging of the 2024 Olympic medalists and seeing what you can copy and add to your boat in 2025. What's up, everyone? Today we're diving deep into the boat setup of some of the world's best Ilka sailors. I've analyzed thousands of photos from the 2024 Olympics, and what I found might surprise you. Stick around to discover the Ilka rigging tips that you're not going to find anywhere else on YouTube. Let's start off with two-time Olympic gold medalist Matt Wern's setup. Here's the first thing I want to point out, and all three medalists from 7 do this. All three sailors take one purchase out of their Vang, and they're all using the Harken Vang system. This is something you can do if you're strong enough to get all of your Vang on and you want to have less rope in the cockpit and you want to get your Vang on faster, particularly at the start line or at a bottom mark. And now I want you to forget everything you thought you knew about splicing. One thing which you'll notice on Matt's boat is he just uses a good old-fashioned bowline to attach a lot of his controls. He might just trust a bowline a little bit more than splicing, or it might just give him a little bit more ability to fine-tune his controls by being able to retie the bowline when he needs to. Wernie also does a couple of things very differently to the guys that he's racing against. The first one is tying his Vang and his Cunningham secondary lines together. Since you're often adjusting those at the same time, having them tied together makes it easier to grab both of them in one go. But this is something that you rarely see from top sailors, and I really only know a couple of people who actually do this. Wernie is also the only Ilka 7 medalist still using the 6-to-1 Cunningham setup. It's also pretty interesting to see how loosely he has his Cunningham attached. You can see how much distance there is from his block to his Cunningham eye. So he really doesn't have that much room to pull on the Cunningham. The other thing you can see in this picture is Werner using a telltale wind indicator. He's actually the only medalist across the Ilka 7 or Ilka 6 from Paris 2024 who was doing this. I assume he does this because it's going to be a lot more accurate in light air and also in dirty air where when you're back in the fleet. Two-time silver medalist Pavlos Kontitas has a slightly different setup to Wernie. Pavlos is using an 8-to-1 Cunningham system, so he's got two single blocks at the top of his Cunningham system there. This has become pretty popular in the Ilka 7 fleet since the advent of the Mark II sail. Pavlos is also one of the few sailors I've seen who attaches his outhaul to the front of the boom. I'm guessing he does this so that he only has one place to look when he's adjusting all of his controls. He can just look towards the mast when he's adjusting his Vang, Cunningham, and outhaul. Here we see Pavlos using the 6-to-1 outhaul system. That's the same as all of the medalists from Paris 2024, but everyone else attaches theirs to the boom cleat in the middle of the boom. Now, this is where we start to see a bit of variation, and you can actually see the influence of different training groups on how sailors set up their boats. Out of the three Ilka 6 medalists in 2024, Marit is actually the only one still using the Harken Vang system, and she's using that with completely stock blocks. She hasn't added a high load block to the top of the system, and she hasn't adjusted the double block with the Beckett at all. One interesting thing to also point out is the amount of tail that Marit has on her Vang primary line. You can see she has a good 10 centimeters of excess rope there. And she also does this on her outhaul primary line. I presume she does this in case she needs to make an on-water repair, or if she wants to be able to adjust her outhaul or her Vang primary lines in the middle of a regatta or on the fly. Um, but it does go to prove, and like we saw with Werney and his bowlines, that the best sailors don't necessarily have the slickest, fanciest rigging, but they do use what they know works for them.
The other thing you see both Werney and Marrett doing is having two start watches on the boat, one on the mast and also wearing one on their wrist. This would serve both as a backup in case one of the watches were to break during the middle of a race or regatta, and this will also help them keep track of the time during a start sequence when they're sailing on port tack. Barrett is still using the traditional 6-to-1 Cunningham system, and the thing which stood out to me was how thick her Cunningham primary line is. I'm guessing she does that so it's more chafing resistant and it's less likely to break when it gets caught between the gooseneck and the boom. And another thing you'll notice in this photo is Marrett's mast retainer line, which he actually attaches here above the gooseneck instead of above the Vang. I'm guessing she does that so that it doesn't get in the way of the Vang or the rotation of the mast at all. Like all of the other medalists, Marrett is using a 6-to-1 outhaul system fixed in the middle of the boom. And the other thing I also noticed in this photo was the blocks at Marrett's mast base plate. You can see here she swapped the stock Ronston blocks for a pair of Harkin Carbo Air blocks instead. With the Olympic silver medalist Anne-Marie Rindam, we start to see a little bit of variation in her setup. Anne-Marie is the first person we've seen using the Ronston Vang body instead of the Harkin, and she's using that with the full amount of purchase. And if we zoom in here on Anne-Marie's Cunningham system, we see she's using an 8-to-1 Cunningham setup instead of the 6-to-1. But unlike the Ilka 7 sailors, she is actually using a double Ronston block at the top of her Cunningham system instead of two single blocks. Looking at Anne-Marie's boat from a different angle, we can start to see a few funky things going on. The first one would be Anne-Marie's start watch setup. So not only does she have a watch on her mast, she also has another watch attached to her deck. So that's a pretty common theme here. Always important to have a backup start watch on your boat. The other thing is Anne-Marie's main sheet. It looks like she's using the pink-red Gorilla Sailing main sheet, which her training partner and bronze medalist Lena Flem Host also uses. This is in contrast to the past where nearly everyone was using the yellow rooster style main sheet. To tie things together, there's a couple of takeaways from this video which you can use when setting up your own boat. The first one, go for functionality over aesthetics. And trust me, ugly can win the gold medal. Plenty of sailors are using ugly knots, bowlines, or lines which are too long, but it's clear they're prioritizing what works for them over what looks good on a boat. Secondly, match your setup to your own strength. If you know you're strong enough, you should look at reducing a purchase in either the Vang, Cunningham, or both if it means you can adjust that control quicker or have less line in the cockpit. And the third thing is to always have a backup start watch in case something happens to your main one. I didn't have time to cover every sailor's setup in this video, but I will be sending out a full guide to how to set up your laser or Ilka like Olympians do on my Substack in a few weeks' time. So I'm going to drop the link down below in the description box. So click the link to go ahead and subscribe if you haven't yet, so that you make sure you get that guide when I send it out. Thanks again for watching. If you have any comments on how these sailors set up their boats or even something you think they could improve, feel free to let me know down in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.